everyone, and welcome to the Smiling Frame channel. If you are new here, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Today, we are going to be discussing the 2010 film, The Expendables. The opening sequence immediately thrusts us into the familiar, high-octane world of mercenary operations. Barney Ross and his crew, the Expendables, are undertaking a seemingly straightforward mission on a remote South American island. This mission, involving the rescue of a hostage, showcases the team's brutal efficiency, a hallmark of their collective experience gleaned from decades spent in the shadows of global conflicts. We see the distinct talents mesh. Lee Christmas, with his terrifyingly precise knife work, a nod to his past, perhaps shaped by relentless training, complements Gunnar Jensen's heavy ordnance expertise. Even though they successfully extract the target, the operation is marred by an unexpected encounter, hinting that these jobs rarely go according to the briefing. Upon returning, the team is approached by Mr. Church, the enigmatic government operative who often serves as their puppet master. Church tasks them with a new assignment in a volatile region, insisting it is merely a retrieval job, though the underlying tone suggests something far more serious is at stake. A complication arises when they are forced to take on a new, younger member, Billy the Kid, whose fresh eagerness contrasts with the seasoned cynicism of veterans like Hail Caesar, whose loyalty to the group is as solid as the weaponry he handles. The true heart of the conflict is revealed when they infiltrate the target location, an abandoned church in a hostile territory. Here, the true nature of the mission unravels. They discover they have been set up. Their local contact, a seemingly trustworthy guide, is betrayed, and the team walks directly into an ambush orchestrated by Villain, a notorious arms dealer and former expendable himself, a fact that adds a layer of bitter personal history to the ensuing violence. In a devastating turn, Billy the Kid is killed, a shocking loss that cuts deep, especially for Barney, who feels responsible for putting an untested man in harm's way. The tone shifts from professional operation to deeply personal vendetta. The death of Billy galvanizes the team, particularly fueled by Christmas's barely contained rage and Ross's grim determination to honor their fallen comrade. They are no longer working for Church. They are hunting Villain. Their path leads them deep into the perilous terrain of Eastern Europe, specifically to the city of Sanaa, where Villain is hoarding weapons and executing his own sinister plans involving plutonium. The final confrontation is inevitable and visceral. The Expendables, bolstered by the unexpected arrival of Trench, another old comrade whom Barney has called in for backup, launch a full-scale assault on Villain's heavily fortified compound. The battle showcases the distinct fighting styles developed over years. Booker T, the silent powerhouse, handles the close-quarters chaos, while Ross and Christmas weave through the gunfire with practiced grace. There's a beautiful, if violent, symmetry in their teamwork, the culmination of countless shared near-death experiences. The showdown culminates in a final, tense face-off between Ross and Villain. It's less about brute force and more about the clash of ideologies between two men who chose the path of the mercenary, but who clearly define their moral boundaries differently. Ross ultimately prevails, neutralizing the threat posed by Villain and securing the stolen materials. The mission, though achieved at a heavy cost, serves as a grim reminder that even these hardened professionals are bound by codes of loyalty and revenge, ensuring that even when they walk away from the smoke, the weight of their history travels with them. They leave the scene, retreating back into the shadows from which they came, having momentarily balanced the scales. The initial foray onto that humid South American island felt almost routine, the kind of mission that barely registers in the annals of men who've seen conflicts from Grenada to the deserts of the Middle East. Lee Christmas, whose fluid movements with a blade suggest a history steeped in martial discipline far beyond mere contemporary training, executed his part with almost bored precision. Watching them operate, you see not just soldiers, but artists of destruction. Each man is a finely tuned instrument, honed by the very wars the world pretends to forget. Gunnar Jensen, with his ever-present heavy weaponry, operates with the casual confidence of someone who trusts firepower above all else, a necessary foil to the more surgical approaches of the others. When the gravelly voice of Mr. Church pulled them back into the fold, the air immediately thickened with unspoken obligations. Church, whose career seems to stretch back further than the visible records of many intelligence agencies, has a way of presenting demands that feel like invitations to disaster. The addition of Billy the Kid was a calculated risk by Barney Ross. Ross, the leader whose own moral compass has been bent and stressed by years of dirty work, likely saw a reflection of his younger self in the kid's eagerness, perhaps hoping to guide him away from the deep cynicism that has settled like dust over veterans like Hail Caesar, whose booming voice and unwavering allegiance are anchors in the storm. The ambush at the derelict church was the turning point, the moment the facade crumbled. Villain, the name itself suggests a grand villainy, was more than just an arms dealer. He was a ghost from their shared past, a comrade who took a wrong turn down the road of greed. This betrayal wasn't just professional, it was profoundly personal, a violation of the unspoken code that binds mercenaries together when the rest of the world casts them out. The raw agony of watching Billy fall silenced the group in a way no explosion ever could. It was the visceral cost of underestimating a ghost. Christmas, whose quiet intensity usually manifests as deadly focus, seemed momentarily undone, his control fraying at the edges, testament to the genuine camaraderie beneath the hardened exterior. The hunt for Villain transformed the mission from a retrieval to an act of penance. They weren't retrieving plutonium for a government handler. They were settling a debt written in blood. The journey into the heart of Eastern European darkness felt like a descent into a familiar hell, one they knew intimately. When Trench showed up, his arrival was less of a surprise and more of an inevitability. Barney knows precisely which weary warriors he can trust when the odds become ludicrously stacked against them. Trench, embodying a steadfast refusal to stay retired, brought with him another layer of history, another set of scars to match the collective tapestry of the team. The assault on Villain's stronghold was a ballet of disciplined chaos. It was a showcase of careers spent mastering the art of overwhelming force. Booker T, always lurking in the periphery, utilizing his stealth and devastating close-quarters skills, moved like a shadow made solid just long enough to deliver punishment. Ross and Christmas fought side by side, their movements so synchronized they appeared almost telepathic, the kind of understanding forged only when you know exactly where your partner will be when the bullets start flying. For Ross, finally facing Villain, it was about redemption, about ensuring that Billy's sacrifice meant something beyond another footnote in a classified file. The resolution wasn't clean, it was bloody, satisfying the need for vengeance that burns hotter than any government contract, before they melted back into the anonymity they crave. The humid air of South America initially provided a deceptive camouflage for the team's inherent lethality. Lee Christmas, whose proficiency with bladed weapons suggests a deep, almost artistic reverence for the clean execution of violence, moved with a grace that belied the danger he presented. He carries the air of a man who found his true calling away from conventional society, mastering a craft that demands absolute focus. Beside him, Gunnar Jensen's approach is invariably one of brute, magnificent overcommitment to firepower. He treats every engagement like a final stand, leveraging massive ordnance to overwhelm the opposition, a necessary counterbalance to the subtlety of others. When Mr. Church arrived with the proposal, the atmosphere immediately soured. Church, a figure perpetually existing in the gray areas of international policy, communicates an authority that seems derived less from official rank and more from knowing everyone's darkest secrets. The inclusion of Billy the Kid, young and brimming with an almost irritating idealism, served as a potent reminder of the passage of time for Barney Ross. Ross, the weathered patriarch whose face tells the story of every compromised moral decision he's made to keep his men alive, viewed Billy with a mixture of hope and profound foreboding. This hope stood in stark relief against the hardened apathy of Hail Caesar, a man whose booming voice and unwavering presence are rooted in decades of loyal service, a living testament to the enduring strength of the mercenary brotherhood. The trap sprung in that forgotten church was devastating precisely because it exploited their loyalty. Violin, the architect of the betrayal, was not just an enemy. He was a former colleague, a black mark on their collective history, someone who sold out the fraternity for profit. The ensuing violence was not just survival, it was a reckoning. Billy's death was a physical blow to the entire unit, the realization that their code of honor had failed to protect the newcomer. Christmas, whose typical calm is almost unnerving, showed fissures of uncontrolled anger, a raw emotion that suggested the loss struck deeply at his sense of duty to protect the vulnerable within the ranks. The subsequent hunt became an almost religious quest for retribution. The mission parameters shifted entirely from government contracts to personal atonement. Ross drove the team relentlessly toward Villain's operations, the grim set of his jaw indicating that this was about more than just retrieving plutonium. It was about balancing the scales of mortality. The arrival of Trench, pulled from an enforced retirement he probably never fully embraced, injected a needed dose of familiar, sardonic defiance. Trench, like Ross, has seen too much to believe in clean endings, but he believes fiercely in showing up when a brother calls, often with the wry comment that he's only there for the potential explosions. The final assault on the heavily fortified compound was a symphony of practiced destruction, illustrating how years spent learning from the world's worst actors results in terrifyingly effective teamwork. Booker T, the silent mover, utilized his expertise in navigating confined spaces and delivering devastating close-range expertise, an almost spectral presence cutting down defenders before they even registered the threat. Ross and Christmas moved in tandem, their partnership built on shared experience that transcends mere communication. They are extensions of each other's fighting instinct. In the final moments against Villain, Ross was not acting as a government operative, but as the guardian of their small, violent world. He dispatched Villain not with political calculation, but with the cold, hard necessity born of protecting the memory of the fallen and reaffirming the brutal yet fiercely loyal bond that defines the Expendables. They depart, leaving the wreckage behind, carrying only the silent knowledge that their brutal form of justice has been served, at least until the next call comes. The immediate aftermath of the final confrontation settles in with an almost unnatural quiet, the kind that only follows the most intense expenditure of violence. As the dust begins to clear around Villain's destroyed compound, the surviving members of the Expendables take a moment to process the immense, bitter victory. There is no celebratory cheering, only the heavy, ragged sound of labored breathing and the metallic scent of spent gunpowder hanging thick in the air. For Barney Ross, the immediate focus shifts from the tactical to the personal. Securing the plutonium is secondary to ensuring his remaining brothers are intact. Lee Christmas, ever the professional even in grief, moves through the wreckage methodically, checking on Booker T and Hail Caesar, his knife sheathed, but his posture remaining coiled, ready for any lingering threat that might spring from the shadows. The departure from the kill site is somber. The team retrieves what they can of their essential gear, the weight of the mission now carried not in their packs, but in the space left empty by Billy the Kid. They make arrangements, likely through trench or a secured line to church, for the discreet removal of Villain's body, a final courtesy extended to a former comrade, however monstrous he had become. The unspoken agreement is clear. They are done with this chapter, and the payment for this unconventional contract will be extracted later, likely in the form of a debt owed by Mr. Church, who, despite setting them up, relied on their singular destructive capabilities to clean up an international mess. Returning to the relative safety of their temporary base, or perhaps flying out on their private transport, the dynamic within the team subtly changes. The bond, already forged in the fires of countless wars, has been tempered anew by shared grief and personal revenge. There's a renewed sense of purpose, perhaps a quiet acknowledgement from Ross, that while he must continue to lead them into the darkness, the boundaries of acceptable risk have been brutally redefined by Billy's sacrifice. The team settles back into the familiar rhythm of veteran mercenaries, maintenance of equipment, quiet contemplation, and the necessary psychological distance required to endure life on the edge. They are a family defined by shared survival, and as they fly toward the horizon, the unresolved tension of their precarious existence, the constant threat of betrayal, the certainty of more violence to come, remains their only constant companion, promising that this temporary peace is merely the interlude before the next inevitable deployment. Christmas's usual precision seems edged with a raw intensity now, as if the experience has stripped away a final layer of professional detachment, revealing the man beneath who valued Billy's youthful enthusiasm. This gesture speaks volumes about their internal morality. Even in utter devastation, they adhere to a code that transcends contracts and governments. Church, who, despite setting them up, relied on their singular destructive capabilities to clean up an international mess he couldn't handle through bureaucracy. Hail Caesar offers a rare, gruff word of reassurance to Ross, a silent acknowledgement of the leader's burden, while Gunnar Jensen seems to handle his massive weaponry with a newly acquired reverence, perhaps recognizing the sheer fragility of life juxtaposed against the power he wields. They are a family defined by shared survival, and as they fly toward the horizon, the unresolved tension of their precarious existence, the constant threat of betrayal, the certainty of more violence to come, remains their only constant companion, promising that this temporary peace is merely the interlude before the next inevitable deployment, wherever the world's shadows might beckon them next. The metallic tang of aviation fuel mixes with the lingering smell of gunpowder as the Expendables board their discreet transport, each man moving with a heavy finality that suggests they've just buried a piece of themselves. Barney Ross stands slightly apart for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the scorched earth where Villain's reign ended. He doesn't look like a man who just succeeded. He looks like a man who has aged another decade in a single afternoon. His usual stoicism is strained, revealing the deep personal toll of being the one who has to make the call to send young men into impossible situations. He catches the eye of Lee Christmas, who offers a curt, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared horror and the unspoken understanding that Ross carries the heaviest guilt. Inside the cramped confines of the transport, the exhaustion finally begins to assert itself. Hail Caesar leans back, his large frame filling the space, his usual boisterousness replaced by a weary silence. He begins the tedious process of cleaning and meticulously inspecting his primary sidearm, a ritual that anchors him when the chaos has been too overwhelming. This meticulous maintenance isn't just preparation for the next fight. It's therapy, a way to impose order on a world that just proved itself utterly chaotic and cruel. Gunnar Jensen, conversely, seems restless. Having vented much of his pent-up aggression during the final push, he now watches the receding landscape with a frustrated energy, perhaps already anticipating the boredom of the downtime until the next urgent summons pulls them from the mundane. Even Booker T, typically the most inscrutable member, shows the strain. His quiet competence is the foundation of their close-quarters survival, but now even his movements seem slightly less fluid. He stares out the small window, the landscape blurring into abstract colors, likely replaying the fatal moment, analyzing what could have been done differently, even though he knows that against villain's setup, near perfection was not enough. Trench, of course, acts as the pragmatic counterpoint to the lingering melancholy. He's already discussing logistics with Ross, how to handle Church's inevitable attempt to minimize their payout, or obfuscate the details of the mission they completed under duress. Trench understands the transactional nature of their lives better than most, always ready to haggle for the spoils, even when the spoils feel tainted by blood. As the aircraft climbs higher, leaving the site of their vengeance behind, the team retreats into their individual shells, a necessary defense mechanism against the accumulation of violence they witness and inflict. They are veterans of countless wars, yet the war against betrayal and the cost of leadership remain the hardest battles. They are bound together by shared survival, but the shared sorrow over Billy is the new, heavy anchor of their brotherhood, ensuring that the next mission they accept will be chosen with an even greater, more guarded scrutiny. The silence is not peaceful. It is the held breath before the next inevitable storm breaks. The return journey inevitably brings the necessity of facing Mr. Church again, not just for the delayed, undoubtedly inadequate payment, but to deliver the news of Billy's death, a complication Church will undoubtedly try to sweep under the rug of plausible deniability. Ross understands this meeting will be less about accounting and more about asserting dominance. He knows Church views the Expendables as expendable tools, and Ross will have to forcefully remind the operative that while their services are hired, their allegiance is only to each other. This confrontation will likely happen in a sterile, high-security location, a world away from the mud and blood they just left, highlighting the chasm between the men who fight the wars and the men who sign the papers authorizing them. The downtime, once spent recuperating in luxury or quietly planning side projects, now feels hollowed out. Lee Christmas, perhaps seeking the tangible control he lost in the field, spends an inordinate amount of time honing his throwing and cutting skills, the rhythmic thud of steel hitting wood becoming the soundtrack to his personal meditation. He probably visits the local area where Billy was from, perhaps ensuring the young man's affairs are settled with respect, a gesture that speaks to the deep, unwritten commitment they all share to those who fall under their banner. This period of quiet is crucial. It allows the collective trauma to congeal into renewed focus, turning raw grief into sharp, focused operational readiness. Meanwhile, the whispers around the globe will begin to settle. Violence' unauthorized stockpile of plutonium is either secured or eliminated, another catastrophic potential event averted by men operating outside diplomatic channels. Ross, knowing the precarious nature of their reputation, will begin vetting potential new recruits, but the search will be agonizingly slow. They are not looking for just another proficient fighter. They need someone whose loyalty is absolute, someone who can integrate into a structure already scarred by fatal betrayal. The next man will need to earn the right to stand beside the veterans who built their careers surviving the likes of Villain, men who learned the hard way that trust is the rarest and most expensive commodity in their line of work. The Expendables retreat, But they never truly disappear. They merely wait in the periphery, the ghosts of global conflicts, prepared to be summoned again when the official lines of command inevitably fail. The inevitable rendezvous with Mr. Church unfolds in a bland, corporate safe house, a sterile environment that contrasts violently with the visceral reality the team just escaped. Ross treats the meeting with icy formality. He doesn't waste time on pleasantries. The message is delivered with the cold finality of a judge's gavel. Billy the Kid is dead, a direct result of Church's flawed intelligence and villain's treachery. Ross stares Church down, his posture communicating that any attempt to downplay the loss or cheat them on their fee will result in an entirely new, deeply unpleasant mission focused entirely on Church himself. Hail Caesar stands just behind Ross, a massive, silent threat, his hand resting near his hip where a sidearm is certainly concealed, providing the visual confirmation that this negotiation is backed by credible muscle. Church, ever the consummate manipulator, offers practiced condolences, perhaps a bonus, but the victory is hollow. The Expendables know they've been played, and they've settled their own score outside the contract, a dangerous precedent for future dealings. The subsequent period of rest is anything but restful for Lee Christmas. His expertise with knives, usually a source of intense focus, becomes an obsession. He doesn't just practice, he engages in brutal, repetitive drills, the air around him vibrating with barely contained fury. He sees Billy's rookie mistake, a moment of hesitation or overconfidence, and it reignites his own deep-seated need to be flawless, ensuring he never leaves his comrade vulnerable again. This obsession likely leads him to revisit old haunts, perhaps searching for obscure martial arts masters or unique blades, constantly pushing the limits of his lethal artistry. For Gunnar Jensen, the silence following the explosive chaos is almost unbearable. He craves action, and the enforced inactivity following such a massive loss chafes at his aggressive nature. He might be found obsessively cataloging and upgrading his arsenal, treating the weaponry as the only trustworthy entities in a world populated by double-crossing former associates. Barney Ross spends his time in the command center of their base, not celebrating, but planning for the next unavoidable crisis. He pores over intelligence reports, not for immediate contracts, but for patterns, looking for the next inevitable vacuum of power that villain types exploit. The reality of his leadership has crystallized. He must choose men who are not just skilled, but spiritually resilient enough to withstand total betrayal. The slow, agonizing process of vetting new talent begins, a process where temperament outweighs talent. He remembers Booker T's silent efficiency, recognizing that in the future he needs more men like him, those who blend into the background until the moment they are needed to deliver decisive, surgical force rather than adding to the noise. The memory of Billy ensures that the Expendables will remain small, fiercely loyal, and overwhelmingly dangerous, a tightly knit unit that views the outside world with ever-increasing suspicion. The quiet aftermath forces a reckoning, not just with the outside world, but internally. Barney Ross knows that after such a high-profile, unsanctioned settling of scores, they have burned bridges faster than they could have built new ones. Mr. Church, despite his best efforts to smooth things over with veiled threats and promises of future, better-vetted jobs, has witnessed the line Barney is willing to cross to protect his crew. This incident solidifies Ross's reputation not just as a reliable mercenary, but as a dangerous variable, someone who prioritizes personal vengeance over geopolitical stability, which, ironically, makes him even more valuable to certain shadowy organizations. Lee Christmas's dedication to his blades takes on an almost spiritual significance. He isn't just training, He is trying to erase the phantom sensation of having been too slow to save Billy. His knives, polished until they gleam like liquid mercury, are extensions of a conscience struggling to accept imperfection. He likely seeks out isolated places, perhaps old training grounds known only to the most dedicated martial artists, pushing his reflexes to the edge of human capability, determined that next time, every throw, every thrust, will be perfectly weighted for survival. Hail Caesar, once the loudest voice of camaraderie, becomes the unit's grounding force during recovery. His silence is potent. It speaks to a deep understanding of sacrifice that requires no elaboration. He focuses on logistics and security for their forward operating base, ensuring that their physical sanctuary is impenetrable. Caesar likely recalls his own younger days, perhaps seeing shades of his own recklessness in Billy, and this fuels his quiet vigilance. He understands that without a secure base, the emotional scars cannot heal, and they will be easy targets for whoever Villain was working for. Gunnar Jensen's agitation during the downtime is palpable. For a man whose entire philosophy seems centered on overwhelming force, inactivity is a form of slow decay. He might be found covertly running simulations or upgrading vehicles, pushing technological boundaries to compensate for the reliance on purely human factors that led to Billy's death. He seeks the predictable logic of machinery, a safe contrast to the unpredictable treachery of men. Meanwhile, Trench, ever the pragmatist, is probably already making discreet calls to contacts outside the official church network, seeking intelligence on the fallout from Villain's operation, ensuring that no residual enemies are positioning themselves to strike the Expendables while they are temporarily vulnerable. They are licking their wounds, but every action is laced with the knowledge that their unique, violent skill set has made them targets for those seeking to exploit or eliminate them. The lingering presence of Church's operation hangs over them like a shroud, a constant reminder that even when they exact brutal justice, they remain enmeshed in the very systems that feed off their violence. Ross understands that the aftermath isn't about rest, it's about repositioning for the next inevitable breach of trust. He begins subtle restructuring, perhaps realizing that the team needs a dedicated intelligence gatherer who operates outside the overt military structure, someone whose loyalty is purely mercenary and whose methods are less conspicuous than the destructive force of Caesar or Jensen. Lee Christmas, unable to fully channel his grief into explosive action, turns his focus inward, obsessively studying historical assassinations and close-quarters combat techniques of ancient warriors. He is seeking perfection not to impress, but to guarantee survival, driven by the internalized failure to protect Billy. The methodical honing of his blades becomes a form of prayer, a silent vow that his hands will never again be a fraction of a second too slow. It's a lonely pursuit, one that highlights the solitary nature of his deadly craft, even within a tight-knit group. Hail Caesar, the bedrock of the team's morale, takes on the role of silent guardian, doubling down on physical security protocols. He treats their base like a besieged fortress, knowing that the forces they tangled with, Villain's backers, will undoubtedly seek retribution. His booming voice, usually reserved for encouragement or heavy mockery, is replaced by short, focused instructions, signaling to the others that while the emotional wounds are present, the operational discipline must remain ironclad. Caesar knows that sentiment must be strictly rationed. Survival demands cold efficiency. Gunnar Jensen channels his restlessness into weapon customization, treating his heavy artillery not just as tools, but as extensions of his own unyielding will. He seems to be reinforcing every component, expecting the next engagement to demand even greater firepower than the last, perhaps seeking a technological edge to negate the human element of surprise that cost them Billy. He has little patience for introspection, preferring the tangible certainty of metallurgy and ballistics over the messy variables of human motivation. Trench, always hovering on the periphery of official commitment, remains the team's external communications expert, utilizing his network of old contacts to gauge the international political currents stirred up by Villain's demise. He doesn't mourn with the others, but he works tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring their assets are secure and that no immediate government entity is closing in to claim the recovered plutonium. Trench understands that their current peace is merely the pause button before the next global crisis requires their unique, untraceable skills, and he ensures they are ready to step back into the fray on their own terms. The shadow of Villain's defeat doesn't dissipate with distance. It settles over the team, hardening their resolve while simultaneously deepening their collective isolation. Ross begins the delicate process of subtly distancing the crew from Mr. Church's direct line of communication. He understands that reliance on external handlers breeds vulnerability, a lesson paid for in Billy's blood. This new operational philosophy mandates increased autonomy, meaning they will only take contracts that align perfectly with their own strategic interests, or those that offer a path to eliminating residual threats linked to their former comrade's betrayal. He communicates this shift not through an angry address, but through the quiet reassignment of responsibilities, expecting immediate compliance. Lee Christmas immerses himself entirely in perfecting a new signature move, perhaps one that maximizes lethal efficiency while minimizing exposure time, a direct countermeasure to the kind of overwhelming ambush they walked into. His intensity is almost frightening. He treats every sparring session with Hail Caesar, who agrees to engage as a sparring partner, as a life-or-death trial. Caesar, in turn, uses his immense strength not to overpower Christmas, but to test the very limits of his speed and precision, offering gruff critiques focused solely on outcome rather than effort. Their exchanges are brutal tests of mutual respect, proving that even grief can forge sharper skills. Gunnar Jensen, needing an outlet that doesn't involve quiet contemplation, obsessively focuses on securing their next mode of transport, demanding a vehicle with superior armor and offensive capabilities. He rejects subtlety entirely, insisting that if they must operate on the fringes, they should do so with overwhelming visible deterrence. He sees the world shrinking, becoming more hostile, and answers that threat by demanding heavier caliber weapons and thicker plating. Meanwhile, Booker T operates with an almost preternatural calm, using the downtime to run deep cover surveillance on Villain's known associates, anticipating which remnants of the arms dealer's network might attempt to retaliate or recover lost assets. His silent reconnaissance is the team's true early warning system, operating beneath the notice of the louder, more action-oriented members. He is the quiet echo of their shared trauma, ensuring that the debt collectors from Villain's side find no easy target. Trench, ever the necessary liaison to the cynical real world, begins pulling strings to ensure that the official narrative regarding the plutonium remains contained and that their involvement is suitably obscured. He's a master of plausible deniability, recognizing that the Expendables' effectiveness lies in their anonymity. He ensures that any communication regarding the final battle is filtered through layers of bureaucratic misdirection, keeping the attention of governments and intelligence agencies firmly focused on the supposed success of a more conventional operation, thus granting the team the necessary breathing room to heal and prepare for the next unavoidable descent into chaos. The atmosphere of enforced solitude soon breeds a restless anticipation among the veterans. The silence, once sought as respite, now feels like a vacuum begging to be filled by the familiar cadence of impending conflict. Barney Ross, recognizing this dangerous inertia, knows that prolonged inactivity breeds doubt and vulnerability. He gathers the core team, Christmas, Caesar, Jensen, and Trench, in their secure common area, the mood palpably heavy. He bypasses the pleasantries, cutting straight to the necessary evolution of their operations. "We move differently now," Ross states, his voice low but resonating with absolute authority. "Church can spin the narrative, but we control the assets. The next job, it comes through us, or it doesn't come at all." This declaration solidifies their hard-won sovereignty. They are no longer merely assets, but sovereign operators in the shadows. Lee Christmas takes this mandate to heart with visible intensity. He begins integrating his newly honed techniques, faster draws, deadlier feints, into team drills. When sparring with Caesar, the impact of their blows seems amplified, fueled by the memory of Billy's misplaced trust. Caesar meets Christmas's aggression with immovable defense, grunting encouragement through clenched teeth. "You ain't too slow, Lee," Caesar rumbles after a particularly vicious exchange that leaves Christmas breathless but successful. "You just cared too much. Now let the caring fuel the speed, not the hesitation." It's the closest Caesar gets to offering condolence, and Christmas absorbs the tactical advice like water, the pain transforming into razor-sharp focus. Gunnar Jensen, still struggling with the intangible nature of their losses, finds solace in upgrading their heavy-duty air support, a massive, heavily modified helicopter they keep under tight wraps. He strips down the interior, replacing comfort with redundant protection systems and installing experimental mounting points for exotic weaponry he's acquired through unsavory but necessary channels. He sees the world as a series of threats that can only be mitigated by overwhelming kinetic force. His paranoia manifests as meticulous engineering. Every wire, every weld must be perfect, because he trusts machine tolerances far more than human promises. Booker T remains the silent sentinel, his presence felt more than seen. He utilizes the downtime to establish a complex web of counter-surveillance around their primary safe houses. He notices minute shifts in local patterns, a new vehicle lingering too long, an unfamiliar face in a routine market, and reports them to Ross in cryptic, precise data packets. He is the team's collective subconscious, picking up the subtle signals of danger that the others, focused on active threats or leadership burdens, might miss. His loyalty is absolute, born from a deep, unspoken appreciation for the brotherhood that accepts his shadowy methods. Trench, meanwhile, successfully executes a masterful piece of obfuscation concerning the plutonium's disposition, feeding controlled leaks to various international agencies, ensuring the focus remains on the dead villains and the clean recovery of the asset, effectively burying Billy's fate beneath layers of plausible deniability. He closes the communication loop with Church, not with anger, but with a cold financial threat. The next misstep will result in the exposure of Church's entire compromised network. As they prepare for their necessary dispersal before regrouping for the next engagement, the Expendables are leaner, sharper, and infinitely more paranoid. The blood debt is paid, but the cost of survival has merely increased their operational security budget, ensuring that when the next inevitable call comes, they will be even harder to kill and even more terrifying to hire. The enforced dispersal that follows their final consolidation is a necessary balm, a temporary severing of the intensely pressurized bond that nearly broke them. Each man retreats to his own, carefully constructed bubble of normalcy, or what passes for it in their line of work. Barney Ross chooses isolation in a remote, untraceable safe house, far removed from any meaningful contact, not to rest, but to engage in the grueling, solitary work of strategic projection. He pores over maps and encrypted files, his face illuminated by the harsh light of his monitors, analyzing the geopolitical vacuum Viline left behind. Ross is searching for the telltale tremors in the global underworld that signal the rise of the next megalomaniacal threat, driven by the chilling realization that the cleanup job is never truly finished. One monster is merely replaced by another, waiting in the wings. Lee Christmas vanishes into the verdant, misty mountains of South America, seeking out remote indigenous communities or forgotten monastic training centers. Here he engages in near-suicidal physical exhaustion, not just honing his knife work, but integrating esoteric forms of combat designed for speed and absolute finality. He often trains in near darkness, forcing his senses to compensate for the visual deception that hampered them during the ambush. He carries Billy's memory not as a weight, but as a terrible, motivating standard of flawless execution. If he ever allows a single moment of internal distraction, he believes, another brother will fall. Hail Caesar keeps close watch over the primary asset storage, a bunker deep beneath the earth, meticulously layered with fail-safes only he and Ross fully understand. His demeanor remains outwardly stoic, but the intensity in his eyes betrays a profound sense of guardianship. He treats every delivery and every security check like a personal duel. Caesar knows the true vulnerability lies not in external enemies, but in the quiet erosion of their internal resolve. His booming presence is now deployed to maintain an aura of unwavering solidity, acting as the team's physical and emotional ballast against the creeping nihilism of their profession. Gunnar Jensen, unable to fully commit to quiet maintenance, flies his newly upgraded transport solo over vast, uninhabited stretches of ocean. He uses the advanced telemetry and long-range munition systems as a testing ground, pushing the limits of acceleration and endurance. He seeks the raw, unfiltered feedback of technology under extreme stress, an environment where mechanical failure is logical and predictable, unlike human loyalty. He often records test footage, not for review, but simply to witness the undeniable, violent efficacy of his work, a necessary reassurance that their firepower remains unmatched. Trench, meanwhile, is the least visible, weaving through the shadowy bureaucracy of international finance and high-level black market brokers. He's liquidating assets tied to Villain, ensuring that any money trail leading back to the Expendables is instantly vaporized into untraceable cryptocurrency or laundered through shell corporations that exist only on paper. Trench doesn't deal in sentiment, but he's meticulous about ensuring their future financial flexibility, understanding that independence is the only true armor against men like Church. He confirms their next potential contract, a high-risk extraction in Eastern Europe, through a dead drop, signaled by a single, untraceable satellite burst, knowing that the lure of a pure mission, unburdened by political baggage, will be too strong for Ross to ignore for long. The quiet is ending. The next storm is brewing on a colder horizon. The 2010 offering, The Expendables, arrived less as a traditional movie and more as a carefully constructed piece of cinematic fan service, a nostalgic reunion of action movie titans largely absent from mainstream blockbuster fare for the preceding 2 decades. It is a film that wears its influences openly, drawing deep from the well of 1980s and early 1990s high-octane action, specifically the testosterone-fueled military fantasies, exemplified by films like Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and Commando. Sylvester Stallone, the architect of this project, plays Barney Ross, the leader of a mercenary unit whose members are deliberately named after classic action tropes. Christmas, Jason Statham; Gunner, Dolph Lundgren; Hail Caesar, Eric Roberts; Toll Road, Randy Couture; and Trench, Arnold Schwarzenegger. The casting itself is the primary spectacle. Stallone, whose career peaks were cemented by creating Rocky Balboa and John Rambo, sought to reignite the visceral, practical effects-driven action cinema he once dominated before CGI took over the landscape. His presence here feels like a self-aware acknowledgement of his legacy, a man deliberately returning to the wellspring of his greatest successes. Jason Statham, the heir apparent to the action throne in the early 2000s following the Transporter series, provides the necessary modern kinetic energy. His character, Christmas, a knife specialist, bridges the gap between the older guard and contemporary stunt work. Statham's contribution ensures the film retains a degree of genuine, if stylized, physical combat proficiency that anchors the otherwise over-the-top narrative. The plot, revolving around the team taking a mission to overthrow a South American dictator, is deliberately skeletal, serving merely as a scaffolding upon which to hang set pieces and character interactions. The true meat of the film lies in the camaraderie, or lack thereof, among the aging warriors. Dolph Lundgren's gunner. Jensen provides the necessary internal conflict, his past issues with drug use and resentment bubbling to the surface, offering a fleeting moment of dramatic tension before he is swiftly brought back into the fold. Lundgren, whose breakout role was as Ivan Drago opposite Stallone in Rocky IV, represents a specific era of cinematic villainy that the film attempts to recontextualize as flawed heroism. The utilization of the guest stars is handled with varying degrees of success. Bruce Willis making a cameo as the mysterious Mr. Church reunites with Stallone and Schwarzenegger, echoing their brief encounter in the Expendables' predecessor in spirit, if not direct narrative continuity. This moment, the trio sharing the screen, is arguably the apex of the film's meta-commentary, a wink to the audience recognizing the historical weight of these three figures in the genre. Schwarzenegger's appearance, though brief, is a reminder of his peak era, characterized by stoic delivery and immense physical presence, even if time has softened his edges. What defines The Expendables is its commitment to practical violence and a return to simpler narrative structures. The film shuns complex motivations in favor of explosive clarity. The set pieces, while occasionally hampered by editing meant to obscure the physicality, celebrate big guns, massive explosions, and grounded fistfights. The film is not concerned with modern sensibilities regarding military intervention or geopolitical nuance. It is a pure distillation of the action hero mythos, where problems are solved not through diplomacy or intricate planning, but through overwhelming firepower deployed by men who look like they were carved from granite. It is a loud, unapologetic throwback, functioning best when it leans into its absurdity and allows its legends to simply be legends once more. The raw, unfiltered presentation of violence is central to the film's appeal, an aesthetic choice that consciously rejects the slick, digital sheen of contemporary blockbusters. Director Sylvester Stallone consciously aimed for a texture reminiscent of films where stunts were performed by actual human beings, showcasing the physical prowess that defined the careers of many of its stars. This dedication to the tactile nature of action is particularly evident in the close-quarters combat sequences featuring Randy Couture's character, Toll Road, the demolition expert. Couture, a legitimate mixed martial arts legend whose reputation was built in the octagon, brings an authentic grounding to the fight choreography, his movements economical and brutally effective, serving as a visceral counterpoint to the larger, more stylized gun battles. Eric Roberts, cast against type as the villainous arms dealer James Monroe, provides the necessary theatrical malice. Roberts, known for his nuanced, often erratic performances in films like Runaway Train, here embraces overt villainy, relishing the opportunity to be the clear-cut antagonist against whom the heroes can unite. His performance is appropriately over the top, fitting the pulp sensibilities of the overall project. The tension between Ross and Monroe is driven by a sense of old-school betrayal, allowing Stallone's Ross to inhabit the role of the betrayed professional, a recurring archetype in his filmography. Beyond the on-screen talent, the underlying emotion of the Expendables is one of earned retirement interrupted. These men are veterans, their bodies carrying the history of 1,000 fictional battles. When they engage in combat, there is an unspoken dialogue between the actors and their past roles. When Jean-Claude Van Damme's character, Villain, finally emerges as the main antagonist, replacing a character originally intended for another prominent action star, it signals a final, personal confrontation between two titans of the direct-to-video action boom of the 1990s. Van Damme, with his signature flexibility and martial arts flair, offers a different flavor of physicality than the heavy-hitting brawlers, revitalizing the third act with acrobatic sequences that recall his heyday in films like Bloodsport. The film's success ultimately hinged on this shared history. The audience wasn't just watching a team of mercenaries. They were watching an assembly of genre icons acknowledging their collective past. The brief, tense moments of camaraderie, like the impromptu golf driving range scene featuring Stallone, Statham, and Schwarzenegger, are essential, injecting warmth into the otherwise grim backdrop of international espionage. These scenes suggest a genuine affection among the performers, a feeling that they are participating in something ephemeral and mutually appreciative of the action genre's golden age. It is a love letter written in gunpowder and debris, valuing spectacle and mutual respect over narrative depth. The deliberate pacing, marked by long stretches of grim determination, punctuated by explosive releases, mirrors the rhythm of the 1980s action cinema this film resurrects. It is a film that understands that in these types of narratives, characterization is achieved through action proficiency and a well-placed one-liner, rather than extensive psychological exploration. Jet Li's inclusion as Yin Yang, though disappointingly brief due to on-set logistical complications forcing script rewrites, adds an element of martial arts precision that contrasts sharply with the blunt force trauma favored by Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Li's character represents the specialized, almost artistic component of mercenary work, often relegated to sidekick status, but vital for specific assignments. The chemistry between Stallone and Statham provides the necessary modern anchor, grounding the older heroes with a sense of continuity. Statham's delivery is dry and witty, a necessary modern foil to Stallone's brooding intensity. Their rapport feels earned, built on the mutual respect of two men who have successfully navigated the transition from practical stunt work to modern stardom. This relationship mirrors the mentorship tropes frequently utilized in their respective solo careers. Furthermore, the film's deliberate simplicity allows for moments of genuine, if heavy-handed, emotional resonance. The sequence where the team revisits the graves of fallen comrades speaks volumes about the cost of their chosen profession, an acknowledgement of the stakes often glossed over in their earlier, more carefree cinematic outings. These solemn moments serve to validate the inherent violence that follows, suggesting that the Expendables are not just thrill-seekers, but professionals engaged in deadly work, albeit work stylized for mass consumption. The environment they operate in, dusty, war-torn fictional locations, is rendered with a purposeful grittiness, enhancing the sense that this mission truly matters, even if the overall narrative scaffolding is flimsy. The film succeeds precisely because it never tries to be anything other than what it is: a testosterone-fueled, meticulously cast reunion designed to give aging action heroes one last, glorious, gratuitous hurrah against a backdrop of unapologetic, large-scale destruction. The visual language employed throughout the Expendables is intentionally rough-hewn, mirroring the ethos of the films they are paying homage to. The cinematography favors natural light and heavy shadows, avoiding the oversaturated palettes of modern tentpoles. This aesthetic choice emphasizes the perceived authenticity of the danger. The sweat seems real, the dirt looks abrasive, and the bullets appear to possess tangible impact. This commitment to a less polished look is a direct nod to the production realities of the late 80s and early 90s, where budgetary constraints often forced creative solutions that resulted in memorable, if sometimes clumsy, action sequences. The relationship between the team members, while often expressed through banter and professional shorthand, hints at deep, unspoken loyalty forged through years of shared trauma and success. This is most evident in the implicit trust placed in each member's specialized skill set. For example, the quiet competence of Toll Road during explosive preparations speaks volumes more than any lengthy dialogue could about his character's reliability. Couture, whose persona is built on stoic discipline learned in the cage, embodies the professional soldier who simply executes the necessary task without fanfare. The film understands that for an audience steeped in action history, exposition is the enemy of momentum. Therefore, character backstory is delivered in brief, sharp bursts, a line about a past mission, a flicker of recognition with an old adversary. This economy of narrative keeps the focus squarely on the present threat and the team's immediate response. Even the villain, despite the late introduction of Van Damme, functions primarily as a necessary focal point for the team's collective aggression. His presence is less about crafting a complex antagonist and more about providing a final, high-stakes sparring partner worthy of these assembled legends. Ultimately, The Expendables functions as a living tribute to the action genre itself. It is a cinematic curio where the actors' legendary careers become inextricable from the roles they inhabit. When Stallone throws a punch, the audience sees not just Barney Ross, but echoes of Rocky winning the title. When Schwarzenegger appears, the ghost of the Terminator lingers. The film's emotional success lies not in its plot intricacies, but in the pure, uncomplicated satisfaction derived from watching these architects of cinematic mayhem finally share the sandbox one last time, blowing things up with a mutual understanding of exactly what the audience came to see. The very concept of the Expendables as a fighting force speaks volumes about the enduring appeal of the mercenary archetype in American action cinema. They are mercenaries unbound by standard military protocol, operating in a moral gray area that allows for maximum on-screen license. This freedom from conventional command structures is what permits the spectacular, highly destructive solutions favored by Ross and his crew. It is an idealized fantasy of action filmmaking, where bureaucracy is non-existent, and the only measure of success is the obliteration of the opposition. This thematic choice also allows the film to skirt any heavy political commentary that might have bogged down the narrative. Unlike some of Stallone's earlier Rambo outings, which wrestled explicitly with the trauma of the Vietnam War, The Expendables offers a clean slate, a South American island serving as a generic landscape for chaos. This intentional vagueness frees the film from having to justify its interventionist actions, allowing the audience to suspend disbelief entirely and focus purely on the mechanics of the ensuing carnage. It is action as pure spectacle, divorced from contemporary geopolitical anxieties. The ensemble dynamic, while occasionally crowded, provides a fascinating study in action star archetypes. Where Stallone embodies the grizzled, burdened leader, relying on grit and strategic thinking, Statham represents precision and modern execution. Couture offers the grounded, immovable object, while Lundgren, even when betraying the team, carries the weight of past rivalry, adding a layer of dramatic history to his role that transcends the simple necessity of a turncoat. The film succeeds by treating these veteran personas not as limitations of aging actors, but as assets, each man having a specific, irreplaceable tool in the box, making their combined deployment an almost mathematical equation for maximum impact. The sheer density of recognizable action figures on screen transforms the viewing experience into a kind of interactive documentary about the history of cinematic punching and shooting. The deliberate lack of nuance in the character motivations is, paradoxically, one of the film's strongest strategic choices. In the era these stars defined, heroes were rarely beset by existential crises. Their drive was usually external: revenge, rescue, or duty. The Expendables adheres strictly to this principle. Barney Ross's motivation against Monroe is rooted in professional obligation and personal insult, a perfectly serviceable engine for a 2-hour explosion fest. This adherence to outdated narrative scaffolding ensures that the audience is never forced to analyze complex emotional arcs that the actors, despite their inherent charisma, might struggle to portray convincingly in a purely dramatic context today. Instead, their emotional bandwidth is channeled into physical performance. Consider the kinetic energy brought by the martial arts specialists. While Jet Li's screen time was curtailed, the sequences where he does appear emphasize fluidity and speed, contrasting sharply with the heavy, percussive style of Stallone. This contrast highlights the specialized nature of modern warfare as depicted in cinema, requiring not just raw power, but technical expertise. Similarly, the brief but impactful moments involving Arnold Schwarzenegger, particularly his return to the genre alongside Stallone, are designed as high-impact punctuation marks. Their exchanges are not deep confessions of friendship, but rather clipped, professional acknowledgments of shared history and lingering capability, reinforcing the idea that these men are weapon systems first and personalities second. The film's self-awareness regarding its own legacy is crucial to its success. It never pretends to be a cutting-edge piece of cinema. It embraces its status as a throwback product. The violence, while extensive, is often stylized in a way that prevents it from feeling truly disturbing. It's cathartic, loud, and overwhelmingly effective, much like the action films of the Reagan era. This intentional framing reassures the viewer that the spectacle is the point, not the underlying tragedy of mercenary life. By delivering exactly what the aging action fan expects, practical explosions, iconic faces, and a very simple objective, The Expendables secures its place not as a groundbreaking piece of cinema, but as the ultimate reunion concert for the genre's most recognizable instrumentalists. The sound design of The Expendables further reinforces its homage to the past. Explosions are massive, bass-heavy events, favoring practical, physical impact over the high-pitched whine of digital weaponry common in contemporary science fiction action. Every gunshot seems to carry the weight of substantial caliber ammunition, a necessary auditory component for a film populated by characters who specialize in heavy ordnance. This emphasis on weighty sound contributes significantly to the visceral, tactile feel Stallone was striving for, making the on-screen destruction feel grounded even when it defies all laws of realistic physics. The choice to place key action sequences in claustrophobic jungle environments and dilapidated industrial complexes served a dual purpose. It provided natural cover for practical stunt choreography, allowing for tighter framing that concealed any necessary digital manipulation, and it visually evoked the gritty battlegrounds of 1980s war and action movies. The locations are deliberately anonymous theaters of conflict, ensuring the focus remains squarely on the performers executing their specialized roles. Even the few instances of emotional vulnerability are filtered through the lens of professional necessity. When Ross deals with the betrayal by Gunner, the reaction is swift, almost clinical. This reflects a narrative where trust is a highly valuable, rarely afforded commodity. Lundgren's Gunner, driven by past resentments and instability, represents the potential cost of a life lived on the edge, a character who nearly buckles under the pressure that the other, more stable veterans have managed to contain. His eventual redemption, facilitated by the team's unwavering loyalty to their own, feels earned within the film's limited emotional scope, emphasizing that in this tight-knit family, even the most damaged component can be salvaged and redeployed. The film's ultimate triumph is its ability to transform the perceived liability of aging into an asset. The heroes are not portrayed as men desperately trying to recapture their youth, but as masters whose skills, while perhaps slower to deploy, are now honed by decades of brutal experience. When they move, there is an economy of motion, a recognition that wasted movement equals unnecessary risk. This tacit understanding among the cast, stemming from their genuine history in the genre, translates on screen into a believable, albeit hyperbolic, portrayal of elite, aging operatives who simply know how to get the job done, regardless of the firepower arrayed against them. The chemistry among the core group is defined by unspoken shorthand, a professional vernacular developed over years of shared near-death experiences. This reliance on nonverbal communication allows the film to maintain a relentless pace. There's no time for lengthy exposition when a threat is imminent. For instance, the subtle nods and glances between Ross and Christmas during reconnaissance communicate complex tactical assessments that would require pages of script for lesser characters. Statham, whose action persona often leans on a quiet intensity and focused aggression, acts as the perfect straight man to Stallone's more brooding, overtly burdened leadership style. He represents the necessary technical precision accompanying Ross's visionary strategy. Furthermore, the inclusion of figures like Eric Roberts' Monroe, while leaning into the melodrama of 80s villainy, serves an important structural purpose. He embodies the exploitative civilian element that the mercenaries often fight against, those who profit from chaos without ever having to face its direct consequences. This dichotomy between the men who bleed for their pay and the financier who merely profits creates a moral compass, however simplistic, for the team's actions. Monroe's capture and ultimate fate provide a clear, unambiguous victory moment, satisfying the audience's desire for decisive retribution against the mastermind. The film's dedication to practical action often meant enduring long, arduous takes designed to capture genuine physical exertion, which subtly bleeds into the characters' portrayed fatigue. When the Expendables finally face Villain in the third act, their weary but determined movements suggest real physical strain, not merely the posturing of younger stars. This earned weariness gives weight to their eventual triumph. Van Damme's stylistic flourishes, while entertaining, serve to break the established rhythm of brute force, offering a momentary, almost elegant challenge before the team inevitably converges to overwhelm him with their combined, heavy-handed power. The Expendables is thus less a narrative journey and more a meticulously orchestrated showcase of various action subgenres, each represented by a titan brought out of temporary retirement for a final, spectacular demonstration of force. The film's commitment to the ensemble cast necessitated a careful allocation of screen time, ensuring that each icon received their requisite moment to shine, often in isolated skirmishes or during the climactic group assault. This structure transforms the narrative from a singular hero's journey into a series of specialized vignettes woven together by the central mission. Terry Crews' character, Hail Caesar, the heavy weapons specialist, embodies this principle perfectly. His contributions are loud, overwhelming, and definitive, often clearing swathes of enemies with sheer firepower, mirroring the signature approach of 1980s action films where the solution to every problem was a bigger gun. Crews, known for his energetic presence in everything from comedies to more serious action roles, brings a necessary, almost joyful enthusiasm to the wholesale destruction he unleashes. The dynamic between the older heroes and the necessity of maintaining a semblance of modern relevance is subtly managed through the utilization of the team's equipment and tactics. While they favor massive ballistics, there are clear nods to contemporary tactical gear and communication methods, suggesting they have adapted their methods, even if their philosophy remains rooted in direct engagement. This modernization of their toolkit prevents the film from feeling entirely like a period piece, allowing it to exist in a slightly suspended timeline where old-school mentality meets cutting-edge, albeit generic, weaponry. Moreover, the recurring theme of brotherhood transcends mere professional association. It is the emotional bedrock that justifies the otherwise reckless decisions made by Ross. When one member is compromised, as with Gunner's defection, the collective response is not punitive bureaucracy, but immediate, focused extraction and rehabilitation. This illustrates a fundamental difference between the Expendables and standard military units. Their allegiance is personal, forged in the crucible of shared peril, which makes their eventual collective success that much more satisfying to the audience who invested in their reunion. The entire production operates on the principle that shared history between the actors equates to potent on-screen loyalty between the characters, a powerful narrative shortcut that bypasses lengthy development in favor of immediate, resonant familiarity. The deliberate underdevelopment of the secondary characters serves an essential function in maintaining the film's breakneck momentum. Characters like Hail Caesar or Toll Road are defined almost entirely by their signature weapon or skill set, allowing the audience to instantly categorize their utility within the mercenary framework. There is no need for deep dives into their personal lives or ethical quandaries. Their existence is validated by their effectiveness in the field. This efficiency mirrors the approach of classic action films, where specialized roles were clearly delineated. The demolitions expert, the heavy gunner, the knife man. The film's visual palette, dominated by earthy tones, grime, and the stark contrast of muzzle flash against dark interiors, creates an immersive atmosphere of constant low-level threat. Even during downtime, like the scene where the team rigs their aircraft, there is a sense that they are always seconds away from engagement. This environmental pressure complements the actors' performances, as men like Couture and Crews carry their weaponry with a practiced weight that suggests years spent carrying literal and figurative burdens. The narrative thread involving the rescue of the captured local operative, Sandra, is the closest the film comes to traditional heroic motivation, serving as the human element that grounds the otherwise purely destructive mission. Her plight provides the necessary moral justification for the team's violent intrusion into the island nation. However, even this element is quickly subsumed by the larger spectacle of taking on the antagonist's forces. Sandra exists less as a fully realized character, and more as the symbolic innocent that validates the Expendables' over-the-top intervention. Ultimately, The Expendables is a self-reflexive exercise in genre nostalgia, succeeding not in spite of its simplicity, but because of it. It is an artifact designed to please a very specific demographic, those who remember the tangible excitement of practical stunts and larger-than-life heroes. The movie understands that in this specific cinematic language, the chemistry between Stallone and Schwarzenegger discussing retirement over a golf cart is as vital to the emotional payoff as the destruction of an entire military compound. It's a celebration of excess, delivered by the men who once perfected it. The film's deliberate choice to pit these icons against a villain like Jean-Claude Van Damme's Villain, who possesses a completely different, more fluid martial arts style, was a clever move to showcase a diversity of combat forms within the largely brute force framework. Van Damme, the master of the split and the helicopter kick, forces Stallone's Ross and the team to momentarily abandon pure firepower for precision martial engagement. This stylistic contrast ensures the final confrontations are not simply repetitive slugfests, but distinct clashes of physical philosophies honed over decades. Violin represents the flashy, high-kicking energy of the early 90s action circuit, meeting the grinding, earthbound power of the 80s stars. Moreover, the film utilizes the setting of a fictional South American state to invoke a specific Cold War-era action trope, one where external military forces intervene to rectify internal political collapse. This reliance on a conveniently corrupt regime frees the narrative from the complexities of contemporary foreign policy, placing the Expendables squarely in the role of unambiguous moral arbiters, albeit violent ones. The crumbling infrastructure and lush, oppressive jungle backdrop visually echo the sets used in classic action escapism, further cementing the feeling that the film has physically transported the audience back to the era of its greatest influences. The moments dedicated to camaraderie, though brief, are crucial stabilizers against the narrative's relentless aggression. The recurring motif of the team sharing a drink or engaging in casual competitive banter serves to humanize these monolithic figures just enough to make their collective survival matter. It suggests that underneath the layers of firepower and hardened exteriors, there remains a bond of shared experience that transcends mere professional contract work. This underlying affection is what allows the audience to root for them as a dysfunctional family rather than just a collection of expensive stuntmen. The film, in its purest form, is an exercise in granting permission for these legends to inhabit their iconic personas one last time, without the narrative constraints of sequel continuity or the need to prove their relevance to a new generation, but rather to reaffirm their established dominance to their original believers. The intentional sparseness of the supporting character arcs also allows for moments of unexpected depth to resonate more powerfully. For example, the tension surrounding Eric Roberts' Monroe isn't just about his treachery, it's about the violation of the unspoken professional code that holds the mercenary world together. Roberts plays Monroe with a slick, almost oily detachment, his every expensive suit seeming a layer of insulation against the very dirt and danger his former comrades thrive in. His smug certainty that he has outmaneuvered the veterans is what makes his eventual, brutally satisfying comeuppance so emotionally resonant for the audience. It's the triumph of grit over avarice. The film cleverly positions its older stars not as relics, but as perfected tools. When Arnold Schwarzenegger appears, his presence is accompanied by an almost audible shift in the film's energy. The air thickens with the expectation of pure, concentrated star power. His dialogue is minimal, often delivered with a knowing wink, a confirmation to the audience that, yes, he remembers, and we remember. And this brief appearance is an acknowledgement of that shared history, untainted by the need for a full narrative arc. He is the cavalry, arriving not to save the plot, but to amplify the spectacle. Even the logistical constraints that resulted in Jet Li's reduced presence are woven into the characterization of Yin Yang. His frequent departures and returns are framed as essential, specialized assignments that only he can handle, lending an air of mysterious competence to the character. He becomes the ghost in the machine, the vital component that moves in and out of the established perimeter, contrasting with the heavy, fixed presence of Couture and Cruz. This narrative maneuvering, born out of production necessity, ironically elevates Yin Yang's status as the elusive specialist. Ultimately, The Expendables functions as a beautifully crafted piece of nostalgia that actively resists contemporary critiques of action cinema. It doesn't apologize for its simplicity or its hypermasculinity. It celebrates them as foundational elements of the genre's golden age. The film's emotional core lies not in the stakes of the mission, but in the sheer, unadulterated joy of seeing these architects of cinematic mayhem finally share the same frame, their mutual respect palpable, delivering a final, glorious, debris-strewn salute to the audiences who grew up watching them kick, punch, and shoot their way through impossible odds. The film's dedication to large-scale, tangible destruction is perhaps its most defining emotional offering to the viewer, a cathartic release from the constraints of contemporary digital spectacle. The sheer volume of practical pyrotechnics employed speaks volumes about the filmmaker's intent to deliver an experience that feels dangerous, tactile, and overwhelmingly real, even when the scenario is absurdly exaggerated. When buildings crumble, the sound mix ensures that the viewer feels the concussive force in their chest, a direct sensory appeal that slick CGI often fails to replicate. This reliance on practical effects mirrors the very ethos of the stars' peak careers, where the danger felt less mediated, more immediate. This commitment to visceral engagement extends to the close-quarters combat, where the choreography emphasizes impact over artistry when necessary. Stallone and Statham's fighting styles are intentionally grounded. Their punches connect with heavy, ungraceful finality. This contrasts sharply with the aerial grace of Jet Li or the stylized spinning kicks of Van Damme, establishing a clear hierarchy of necessary force. Ross and Christmas win not through artistry, but through sheer, relentless application of superior experience and overwhelming stopping power. Their weariness is not a weakness, but a confirmation of their longevity. They know how much energy must be expended to achieve victory against superior numbers. Furthermore, the film's inherent understanding of its own legacy allows it to wring maximum impact from the simplest character interactions. The reunion between Ross and Trench, Schwarzenegger, is less about plot advancement and more about leveraging decades of shared Hollywood mythology. The dialogue is clipped, loaded with in-jokes and references to past roles that only the dedicated viewer will fully appreciate. This forms an exclusive bond between the performers and their most loyal audience, creating an atmosphere of shared reminiscence. It's a wink across the fourth wall, acknowledging that everyone present understands the meta-narrative. This is a victory lap, and the rules of conventional storytelling are temporarily suspended in favor of fan service executed with professional precision. The film, therefore, is not merely an action movie. It is a beautifully orchestrated piece of performance art, celebrating the sustained power of the action star archetype. The very act of assembling these titans feels like an act of cinematic defiance against the prevailing tide of risk-averse blockbuster filmmaking. There is an unspoken agreement between the cast and the director to forego self-doubt and lean wholly into the grandiosity of their collective past. This manifests in the costume design, where the team often dons matching, almost paramilitary attire. Uniforms that signify a unified, unwavering purpose, stripping away individual pretense in favor of the collective, lethal identity of the Expendables. The battered look of their transport plane, constantly in need of repair and improvisation, further underscores this ethos. They are operating outside the slick, government-funded sphere of modern special operations. They are independent contractors whose success relies on ingenuity and sheer force of will over state-of-the-art satellite surveillance. This rugged independence is embodied by the characterization of Toll Road, Randy Couture, the demolitions expert. Couture, whose physical presence is one of immovable, granite-like discipline, conveys volumes through stillness. When he meticulously handles high explosives, the camera lingers just long enough to confirm that this is not a role, but a practiced mastery. A man who understands the delicate balance between annihilation and survival, perhaps better than anyone else. His trust in his equipment and his unspoken rapport with Ross concerning timing and placement speaks to a loyalty forged in situations where a single miscalculation means instant oblivion. The film's climax, set against the backdrop of the liberated island, is less a battle and more a triumphant procession of personalized carnage. Each expendable gets a final, signature moment, a nod to their established cinematic vocabulary. This structured release of accumulated aggression satisfies a deep-seated audience craving for narrative closure delivered via spectacular violence. It's the final, deafening chord in a symphony of explosions, confirming that these aging architects of mayhem have not lost their touch, but merely refined their destructive artistry. The Expendables ultimately succeeds because it doesn't try to invent new heroes. It chooses, instead, to honor the legends already etched into the collective memory of action cinema, allowing them one last glorious rampage on their own, unapologetically large-scale terms. The overarching achievement of the Expendables lies in its masterful manipulation of audience expectation through an appeal to nostalgia so direct it borders on the meta-theatrical. The film doesn't simply feature action stars. It stages a retirement party where the guests are required to demonstrate their enduring capabilities one last time. This is powerfully evident in the way the movie handles silence. The quiet moments are deliberately loaded, thick with the implied weight of decades spent surviving impossible odds. When the men share a rare, unguarded moment, perhaps while cleaning weapons or assessing damage, the dialogue is sparse, suggesting a profound, almost spiritual exhaustion beneath the bravado. This manufactured weariness adds a layer of pathos to even the most over-the-top action sequences. For example, when Barney Ross takes a significant hit, Stallone's performance leans into a grimace born of genuine accumulated injury rather than mere dramatic effect, reminding the audience that even demigods of cinema require a moment to reset. This subtle anchoring in physical reality makes the subsequent return to full-throttle action, often signaled by the reintroduction of a signature weapon or a specific fighting stance, all the more potent. It's the surge of adrenaline powering the veteran through one final push. Even the female characters, notably Sandra, function primarily as catalysts or proof points for the men's inherent heroism, reinforcing the insular, male-centric ecosystem the team thrives in. Sandra's arc is not about her empowerment, but about her successful extraction, solidifying the Expendables' role as protectors within their own specific moral code. The entire structure demands that external elements either serve the team's objective or be summarily eliminated, a clarity of purpose that modern, more morally ambiguous action films often shy away from. The Expendables revels in this black-and-white morality, where duty to the crew supersedes all other concerns, making their bond the only truly reliable constant in a world of betrayal and chaos. It is, in essence, a perfectly engineered machine designed to validate the audience's enduring affection for its parts. The film's